The talent keeps rolling in, but Miami did lose some important players from last year's team. So, which Hurricanes have the biggest shoes to fill next season?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Alex Donno, your host. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. Thank you to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch every day. We're free on YouTube. We're free wherever you get your podcasts, and we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So I feel like Miami has overall been bringing in more talent than they've been losing over the last couple of years since Mario Cristobal's arrival, all the hard work he's done in recruiting, some key acquisitions they've made in the transfer portal. But yeah, Miami has a handful of players from last year's team who are about to get drafted into the National Football League. You do have some players who left in the transfer portal who need to be replaced as starters or as near starters. So who's got the biggest shoes to fill this year? I'm going to start at the most important position on the field, and that's quarterback. Now, when you talk about filling shoes, this one's a little bit different than the other players I'm going to bring up because I know Tyler Van Dyke, who was Miami's starter the last 2.5 years, he had an overall not so good year last season, okay? But at the same time, Cam Ward, he's got the most important job on the team this year, and he does have to fill the shoes of the former starting quarterback. Hopefully, he not only fills those shoes, he exceeds the size of Tyler Van Dyke's shoes. Because, yes, in the case of Cam Ward, he's going to need to be better, more consistent, and possibly considerably better than Van Dyke was last season if Miami expects to reach new heights this year. I think we can all agree 7-6 wasn't good enough last year. We can all agree that some of the poor offensive performances Miami had, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, like games like that should just not be happening consistently at the University of Miami. And Cam Ward is going to need to step up. And I feel like this is a player who is equipped to do that. New reports coming out on Ward, his work ethic, and what he's accomplishing so far in the offseason workouts. Now, Miami is just a couple of weeks away from spring football officially opening up, but the work is always going on in the weight room and on the Green Tree practice fields. Ward is working out, throwing to receivers, all that. Inside the U is reporting that, and I love to hear this, that Cam Ward is conducting his business like an NFL quarterback in offseason workouts so far. That he's got a very professional approach, and it's impressing people around the building. And I know that that's one of the reasons why Ward decided to stay in school for another year and come to Miami was he wants to really kind of perfect that NFL-style approach before he enters the NFL draft next offseason. So apparently that's being seen around the building so far. He's got a big arm, as we know. His big arm has been confirmed so far. But yes, he's operating in a way that sets a great example for his teammates, right? You consider some of the young quarterbacks Miami has. Ja'Carri Brown, still young. Emory Williams, very young. Judd Anderson is getting his first impressions of what a college quarterback room looks like. So it's nice to have someone like Ward setting that example. And in terms of filling the shoes or exceeding the shoes of Tyler Van Dyke, Cam Ward last season, I know different team, different conference, but he threw for 1,000 more yards than Van Dyke did last year, over 3,700 to about 2,700 for Van Dyke. Ward threw 5 fewer interceptions than Van Dyke did. He threw 6 more touchdowns than Van Dyke did. Now, Cam Ward, the big thing that we've brought up, and I know you guys are going to bring it up, he's got to cut down on the fumbles. He's got to perfect the ball security. Now, obviously, part of that is hopefully going to come naturally from playing behind a better offensive line than the one he had at Washington State, but his ball security, Cam Ward's ball security needs to be a big point of emphasis. So, replacing an inconsistent guy, he may not have the biggest shoes to fill, but I had to bring up Ward because he's got an incredibly important job this year. And also, this may not be completely fair to him, but Cam Ward being here has raised the expectations and raised the bar very high for what the national pundits expect Miami to do this year. We talked about the way too early top 25 that came out from 24/7 Sports that has Miami ranked 12th heading into next season. ESPN has updated their way too early top 25. They don't give Miami as much respect, but you know what? I think ESPN may be a little bit more on the ball on this one. They rank Miami 24th. I thought 12 probably a little bit high. You could debate whether 24th is too low, but it seems kind of reasonable for a team that hasn't proven a whole lot in recent years. So, but Cam Ward, no question, he is raising the expectations at Miami. Now, other players who have big shoes to fill. I'm going to go next to the safety positions. Mishael Powell, transfer from Washington. Savion Riley, transfer from Vanderbilt. They have massive shoes to fill. Now, right now, and again, there's going to be competitions. You know, I can't guarantee you that both of these guys are starters, but Powell and Riley, especially Powell, are the ones that I pencil in as starting safeties for next year. They're the presumed starters to replace Cam Kinchens and James Williams, who are both headed to the NFL and should both be drafted within the first 2 days. Powell, they're both getting really good feedback so far, Powell and Riley, but Powell especially, because he's played in so many big games, right? I mean, he can set the same sort of example to teammates that Cam Ward can at quarterback. I mean, Mishael Powell, he just started for Washington a month and a half ago in the national championship game and started every game for the Washington Huskies this past year. So Powell and Riley. Now, again, they're not going to be the only ones competing for starting safety jobs. I'm not sleeping even on Zaquan Patterson. I'm not sleeping on Jaden Harris and Markeith Williams and Caleb Spencer. We'll talk a little bit more about him. But, you know, Powell and Riley are experienced guys coming from other programs, and they're going to have very big shoes to fill when you talk about trying to replace one of the better safety duos in the entire country. That's what Cam Kinchens and James Williams were for the past few years, and Miami is now turning the page on a new chapter there. I'll tell you, I maybe could have even let off with this guy. You talk about having big shoes to fill. Transfer center, Zack Carpenter. He has massive shoes to fill. This is the guy who's going to be the man to replace Matt Lee. Matt Lee was only here for 1 year, but boy, he was all Kane for that 1 year. Lee is the type of guy that, like, he was so all in as a Miami Hurricane. It felt like he was here for 3 or 4 years, even though Lee was only here for a season. Matt Lee last year, top 4 pass blocking grade among centers in all of America. He only surrendered 1 sack in his final 3 collegiate seasons, the 2 at UCF and then the 1 at Miami. And Carpenter is the guy who's got to replace that. I like Zach Carpenter a lot. He was highly touted. He's very experienced. Played 4 years with the Indiana Hoosiers. Graded out pretty well last year. He surrendered 8 pressures and 3 sacks. So those are not Matt Lee numbers, but he did pretty well. Now, keep in mind, he was playing with the Indiana Hoosiers, not a very good team around him, a 3-9 team last year. And they also played a much tougher schedule than Miami played last year. They had to face Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin in conference. They faced Louisville out of conference among the rest of their Big Ten schedule. So Zach Carpenter, we don't necessarily need him to be as good as Matt Lee. Maybe he will be. Maybe he'll be better. But he's got huge shoes to fill, replacing one of the better Canes last season. Here's another one who's got big shoes to fill. Transfer defensive tackle C.J. Clark. He's going to be the guy to fill the shoes of Leonard Taylor. Now, I know Leonard Taylor was not the most consistent defensive tackle or player at Miami in recent years, but he always graded out very well, including last season. Last season was his best season in college, Taylor, and he's 2 months away from joining an NFL team. Now, C.J. Clark, maybe more consistency, probably not as high of a ceiling, but a higher floor than Taylor. C.J. Clark started all 12 games for one of the best defenses in the conference last year, the North Carolina State Wolfpack. He was credited with, against Miami, remember NC State beat Miami, as we remember. He was credited with 3 tackles and a sack against Miami last year. So those are huge shoes to fill for C.J. Clark. We have a lot more to come on this episode of Locked On Canes. I want to talk about a little bit more of the updated feedback on offseason workouts. Our guys, Gaby and David Lake at Inside the U, have done a good job sharing some of this intel. Want to talk about some more players who are turning heads and a couple of options that are out there in terms of players Miami might look at. The top wide receiver from Syracuse last year is going to be in the transfer portal. And there's a 4-star Michigan signee linebacker who's trying to get a release from his national letter of intent. Will Miami pursue? We will talk about these things and so much more as we continue this Valentine's Day episode of Locked On Canes. Keep it locked. Guys, buying last-minute tickets should not be a stressful experience, and it never is at GameTime. On the GameTime app, you are finding the best deals, last-minute ticket deals, flash deals. You can see the views from your seat directly there on the app, exactly what you're going to be looking at. And what I love about GameTime, all-in pricing. You know exactly what you're going to pay. They don't tack on the fees at checkout where it's like, hey, I think I'm getting a $20 ticket. Oh, no, now it's a $37 ticket. Upfront pricing at GameTime, which is incredible. And I'm telling you guys, the best deals in our area. I'm looking at tickets to an upcoming game on the 20th, Ottawa Senators at Florida Panthers for just $20. A huge ticket for tomorrow night is going to be Lionel Messi taking on his boyhood club, Inter Miami against Newell's Old Boys in a friendly. You can get in for $100 for a very, very big ticket in the area. So you want to check all of this out at GameTime. Guys, the GameTime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the GameTime app and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Guys, for the everydayers, I hope you're checking out Locked On Sports today. This network, Locked On, has launched the first ever 24/7 streaming sports YouTube channel. There's always something going on. Just search Locked On Sports today. National experts and local experts like myself are talking about the biggest stories in sports 24/7 streaming at Locked On Sports today. All right, so I talked about players with the biggest shoes to fill for this coming season. Now, a little bit less pressure on the backup quarterbacks, obviously, than the presumed starting quarterback, which is Cam Ward. But Reese Poffenbarger, the other transfer quarterback out of Albany, he's also getting really solid feedback from offseason workouts so far. Gaby Urrutia wrote on Poffenbarger, many around the program are extremely high on his skill set. He has a big arm and he is accurate. He also writes about Jakari Brown's progress. Brown is considered one of the best overall athletes on the team. This will be a spring for him as he competes with Poffenbarger for the backup quarterback spot. He's in the 6'4", 230-pound range right now. Jakari Brown is a big, big dude, and I'm always rooting for him. On Emory Williams is reacclimating himself into things after suffering that injury. The goal this year is for him to get healthy, continue to develop, and hopefully get back that red shirt year. He does an awesome job of sticking around Dawson's offense and watching film. Yeah, folks, people have asked me in recent weeks as we march towards spring football, position battles that I'm really going to be looking at. And one of those position battles is going to be for the number 2 quarterback job. Because I take Reese Poffenbarger, I take him very seriously as a contender for that. He's, reminds you a little bit of a young Baker Mayfield, like his skill set, Poffenbarger. But then I don't know if anybody on the team has a higher ceiling than Jakari Brown. And he continues to progress and work on it. I thought he played pretty well against Rutgers, especially considering hadn't played a meaningful football game in over a year. And he went out there. I know Miami lost the game and all that. He threw an interception, but he played pretty well in that game. So the competition we're going to get between Jakari Brown and Reese Poffenbarger for that number 2 job. And I know people are saying, hey, well, why aren't you talking about Emory Williams again? I think Emory Williams is probably going to do what Jakari did last year and use this year as his redshirt year. So, unless he's just heads or tails better than the other backups, and ideally, Cam Ward plays all 12 games. He could preserve the red shirt anyway. But I don't think Emory's going to be in the running to be the number 2 quarterback this year because I think he wants to use the red shirt year the way that Jakari Brown did last year because he burned his redshirt opportunity this past season. So it's nice to know that Poffenbarger is making impressions the way that Cam Ward is also making impressions. Now, here's an very interesting player who's seemingly available again in the transfer portal. You remember he briefly entered the transfer portal in January and then took his name out of it. Damien Alford was the leading receiver on the Syracuse Orange last year. Now, my guy, Aronde Gadsden Jr. was injured most of the year. Otherwise, he probably would have been. But Damien Alford was their guy. 6'6", 210 pounds. He led the Orange with 610 receiving yards last year. He averaged 20 yards per catch. So physically, Damien Alford fits the profile of the type of receiver Miami should be going after. Because I think Miami will use the spring transfer portal window that opens on April 15th. I think they're going to use that window to potentially add another wide receiver. And apparently Alford is going to be in that portal. And this, to me, physically would be a great option. But there could be, and I emphasize could be, there could be red flags here. Reportedly, he was dismissed from the Syracuse Orange. Are there character concerns? There is a rumor going around there that he was, allegedly skipping classes and skipping workouts at Syracuse. Rumor. I wonder if that's the real story. There are three sides to every story. There's one person's side, the other person's side, then there's the truth, right? Is that the real story? Was he really skipping classes and skipping workouts? Because Alford told his side on an X post that he actually deleted this after initially sending it, but, people screenshot everything. He said, quote, "On Friday, I communicated with the head coach that I was going to consider transferring after graduating in the spring. I was asked to reconsider. Without further conversation, I have learned from social media this morning that I am, quote unquote, dismissed from the team." So I have to wonder. Now, thankfully, I'm not the guy in charge of vetting players. Neither are, most any of you who are listening to this or watching this. This is Mario Cristobal and Kevin Beard and their staff. They're going to have resources into vetting this player that I cannot even imagine when it comes to talking to former coaches of his, talking to the player himself, getting references from Syracuse. They're going to dot all their I's and cross all their T's if this is someone they're interested in. And I think Miami might be, because remember, I mentioned Damien Alford, it was back in early January, had briefly entered the transfer portal, decided to withdraw his name from it. But I think in the brief time that he was in the portal, Miami was reportedly interested. So this is a player that I think they've kicked the tires on in the past, and they may kick the tires on again. They just have to make sure, obviously, that they wouldn't be bringing in a guy who might be a liability for showing up to workouts or showing up to class, because obviously you can't afford to take too many chances on potential liabilities. Miami took a chance, different situations, I'm sure. Miami took a chance on Jamil Burroughs, the defensive tackle from Alabama, and that didn't work out. He's already off the team, back in the transfer portal. So you have to be very careful when you use scholarships and give opportunities to players. So Miami is going to have to do all the due diligence on Damien Alford. But on the field stuff, physically, he checks off all the boxes, right? You're talking about a 6'6" outside threat who's a proven commodity in this conference, right? Having experience in the ACC, 610 receiving yards last year, 20 yards per catch. This would be a very intriguing player if he checks off all the off-field boxes. Now, another player who is seemingly going to be available, who I think Miami has definitely done due diligence on this guy in the past, 4-star linebacker signee Jaden Smith, who signed with Michigan in the class of 2024. Obviously the well-publicized coaching change at Michigan. Jaden Smith is seeking a release from his national letter of intent. So he wants to get out of that or hit the transfer portal if they don't let him out of it. Now, this is someone, I think Miami recruited him, and he's got a relationship with Coach Derek Nicholson because they're both from North Carolina. And Miami has already been mentioned as a school to watch. Since it was reported he's seeking his release from Michigan, USC, Florida State, and Miami have been mentioned as schools to watch. I don't know about this one, though, because the only problem here, nothing against Jaden Smith, but the problem Miami has is good problem to have. Their linebacker room might already be too full. Derek Nicholson has done such a good job recruiting that, he may not have room to add another one, because Miami has added 6 good linebackers in the past 2 classes. 2023, Miami signed Bobby Washington, who's crushing it in offseason workouts, by the way. Popo Aguirre, Malik Bryant, and Marcellus Pulliam was the other one. In 2024, Miami has signed Darius Hayes and Bobby Pruitt. Linebacker room is pretty full right now. I don't know if Miami even has a spot for Jaden Smith, but if they do have a spot for him, I think this is a player that would be very intriguing in that regard. Folks, another thing I want to do on this episode is we've gotten so many awesome questions from our Locked On Canes insiders. I want to answer some of those. And guys, if you're an everydayer, you want to take your everydayer experience to the next level, become a VIP by joining Locked On Canes Insiders. I include a link in the show description below. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours and vice versa. One-on-one questions that we answer on shows. I give you guys recruiting scoops, breaking news, show updates. I tell you guys about certain things before I have a chance to tell our audience on. So join Locked On Canes Insiders. Click the link below. Try it free for 14 days. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We try to give you a lot of added value on there. So I want to answer questions on, will Miami's bye week blues continue? Because Miami always loses after the bye week. They got 2 bye weeks next year. Is that 2 guaranteed losses off the bye week? Position that I'm looking most forward to seeing develop during spring football and fall camp. Alignment between Mario Cristobal and the powers that be at Miami. We got a question about that. We got a question about Cam Ward and his receivers. We got a question about players making gains in the strength and conditioning program. So, my friends, we have so much more to talk about. You want to keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. Folks, you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making this Valentine's Day episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We are free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Got some awesome questions from our Locked On Canes insiders. Question asked me, I know you don't do predictions this early. And he's right. He knows. I usually don't do my official win-loss prediction until the week the season starts, when I lock it in, whether I'm 9-3, 10-2, 7-6 again, 7-5. I don't lock that until the week before, he says. But I was thinking of 2 losses that could happen outside of 2 other possible losses. But these 2 losses would come after bye weeks. And we have 2 bye weeks this year, he says. And he points out Miami is 0-7 since 2016 after the bye week. So what are your thoughts on this? We could still be 10-2, or we could be 8-4. That stat, by the way, it's a little depressing. We call it the bye week blues down here in South Florida. That's what they call it in Coral Gables. So I look at the bye week situations. Now, Miami's first bye week comes right before the road game at Louisville. Now, that's one of the toughest games on your schedule anyway, going into Louisville. Like, you know, whether that's after a bye week or not, some people will pencil that in as a loss or a possible loss. So having that game after the bye week, and it's Louisville and then Florida State in consecutive weeks, I actually like having the bye week before that game and that stretch, right? To have a little rest, get players healthy, regroup before the 2 toughest games on your schedule. At Louisville, home against Florida State consecutively. Those are the toughest games on the schedule next year, in my humble opinion. So I actually like having the bye week there. This should be looked at as an opportunity, not a curse. So if they use their bye week properly, if you'd like to think the culture and the work ethic is changing in that building, Miami needs to try to take advantage of that extra time to get healthier and to prepare for one of the toughest opponents on the schedule. So I don't mind having a bye week there. The other bye week, that could be the trap opportunity, because your second bye week comes right before the Wake Forest game at home. Miami, they're going to be favored against the Demon Deacons, maybe heavily favored, depends on how they do up to that point. So Miami cannot afford to overlook them. And classically, you would say, hey, you got a winnable home game after a bye week. That's usually when Miami lets you down. So, hopefully that's not a loss or an additional loss on the schedule. Colorado Kane asks me, what position are you most looking forward to seeing develop over spring and fall camp? And would it be out of necessity or just out of talent blossoming? Yeah, for me, defensive backs. I want to see Damari Brown have a really strong showing in these camps because Damari's going to have an opportunity to be a starter, whether he's a starting cornerback or the starting star position. I pencil in Damari Brown as a starter next year, heading into his second year. He's got a huge opportunity. I want to see more development out of Caleb Spencer, the young safety. That's a name that we've been bringing up a little bit more and probably deserves more. He didn't play much, wasn't a factor this past season, but I do recall Caleb Spencer as an early enrollee, true freshman last year, having a really good spring camp and playing well in fall camp. So he might be ready to take on a bigger role this coming season. And Zaquan Patterson, if there's anybody who, could be ready to make an impact as a true freshman, I go JoJo Trader on offense, Zaquan Patterson on defense. No coincidence they both come from the same high school because Chaminade was awesome last year. And Zaquan is already impressing people in workouts, that he's a freak out there. So, yeah, for me, defensive backfield out of necessity because, Miami probably lost the most talent from that position, and they had that's the biggest question mark on the team. Safeties and corners. Daryl Porter, I don't worry about. He had a good year last year, very experienced, but there's going to be a lot of youth and a lot of new players playing around Daryl Porter. So for me, defensive backfield. We get a couple of incredible questions. I'm going to answer them as best I can from Trailblazer6, who says, in your opinion, is the program overall still on track from Mario's initial hire? Do you have the feeling that we will still have Mario at the helm in 5 years, even in this crazy world of college football now? Is the relationship between him, Radakovich, the AD, and Frank, the president, strong enough to maintain a level of commitment and consistency that a successful program needs? Listen, overall, I still feel really good about what Cristobal's doing so far. And even though the results on the field have not been good enough, I'm giving him time to correct that. When it comes from an infrastructure standpoint, and this goes obviously again to the administrators, Miami continues to build up their facilities. Miami continues to become even more of a powerhouse than they already were from an NIL standpoint, which we all know how important that is. And Cristobal is rocking and rolling on the recruiting trail. So I know that the results have not been good enough to this point actually on the field, which obviously that's what matters most. But in order to create better results, you have to create a more talented roster and create a better infrastructure. And Miami's doing all of those things. So I still feel good about the trajectory of Mario's tenure. The results on the field this year and over the next 2 years, if you're asking me whether he's going to be the head coach 5 years from now, probably. He's on a 10-year contract heading into year 3 of that. Obviously, if Miami's putting up catastrophic results on the field the next 2 years, that could change, right? I mean, if he's not performing, he could be fired. I'm not hoping or expecting that to happen, but I feel pretty good about the tenure. Trailblazer also asks, what's next on Dan Radakovich's vision board? Do you think he's seriously looking for conference realignment, or do you get the sense that the university believes they can still recruit the best players, play a softer schedule in the ACC, and then fight their way to another championship and an expanded playoff? Does he need to renovate more buildings again? Can we keep improving the facility? The facility stuff, that's happening. They either just have or they're about to break ground on the new building that Miami's going to have world-class facilities. They already have good facilities. They're working on making those even better. As far as conference realignment, all we have are rumors from a Miami standpoint. Miami's very quiet. They're not like Florida State screaming from the mountaintops, suing the ACC. Like, I can only hope Miami has contingency plans because I don't want to be in a conference that becomes more and more irrelevant. In the ACC, they're already, compared to the Big Ten and the SEC, they're already not very relevant right now. If Florida State finds a way out, they become even less relevant. So I can't speak for sure on where Miami stands on conference realignment. I can only hope that's something that they're looking at and getting out of the ACC. We get a question from I don't know who this is. They're from a 208 area code that says, hey, I know this sounds creepy. Don't care. I know it sounds creepy, but I don't care. I want to know how much weight these guys have put on. I want to see guys looking like boulders. Miami's strength and conditioning program, guys always seem to, especially the freshmen that enroll early, always seem to put on big-time size. I don't have a whole lot of the stats in front of me, except for one guy. Let me tell you one guy who seems to be putting out like freakish output in the weight room and in the green tree fields. That's Bobby Washington. Second-year linebacker Bobby Washington is absolutely getting jacked. He's up to 230 pounds. He's 6'3", 230, but he's not putting on weight at the expense of speed, because not only is he 6'3", 230 now, Bobby Washington this offseason has been clocked running a 4.41 40-yard dash. 4.41 40-yard dash at 6'3", 230. He's going to be someone to look out for. Like, I don't necessarily project him as a starting linebacker next year. Kiko Mauinoa, Wes Bassaint are the guys you pencil in there. But I think Bobby's going to get on the field. He got on the field a little bit last year, but I think he'll get on the field a lot more this year. He's absolutely rocking the offseason program. We had some more questions that came in that I didn't have time for. Try to answer some more of those later this week. And folks, I appreciate everyone supporting the show. Make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we'll talk to you again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.